Yeah.
We just found you doing that last week.
Yeah, I gave that sermon, don't judge, and then I drive through Noonan. Lord, give me strength. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't be a hypocrite. Yep. Yeah. It's hard. Hard preaching, hard living. All right. Well, this morning we're going to start off more somber. We're going to be starting at Mark 15, verses 16, and this is where the soldiers mock Jesus. We'll read 15, 16 through, 20. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the Praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put on his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. So this is you remember last week we talked about Jesus was before Pilate. Pilate found no guilt in the man, but through this entire kangaroo court, they said, crucify him. And Pilate's like, okay, and handed him over to the soldiers to be flogged. Now this seems to be after the flogging, or it's a little bit difficult when you start to match up the other Gospels, right? The sequence of events that happened. I'm not sure if this, I think this happened after, but it could have been before the flogging. I think it happened after, because they led him away to the Praetorium, and did all this stuff. It seems that, well, we'll talk about that in a second. But it seems that all of this seemed like they handed him to flog, and then Mark is picking up the story, because you kind of know what flogging is. What Mark is trying to highlight here is the fulfilling of prophecy, right? So, flogging, physical event, but really what he's talking about, the whole reason he put this in. Remember, Mark is a very short book, so everything he puts in is there for a reason. He's trying to highlight the fulfilled prophecy. So soldiers led him away to the Praetorium. This would probably be a section of Herod's palace in the area. And so probably a place where the soldiers were stationed or hung out or, had their equipment. Because when we read this, it says they grabbed a purple robe, they spit on him. It seems like a glorified locker room kind of setup. But at the same time, yes, David? Yeah, so Praetorium, generals, and we see that from the purple robe, which we'll get to in a second. My notes indicate that it was a section of the palace, which could be the same. I mean, you've got the palace, which is where the governor, ruler of that area is, and then right beside it, a military headquarters, general's headquarters. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it would have been big. Because, it would have been a very large area, because it says pulled in a whole company of soldiers. So a company is a division of a legion. My note says that this will be about 600 soldiers. So this would be a pretty large area. I mean, you figure if we crammed people in here, how many could we fit? 150? Maybe 200? So maybe 3 times the size of this. It would have been a large auditorium type section. Give out reports and stuff. So they pulled him in and just completely outnumbered, right? 600 to 1, right? Now, then it says they put a purple robe on him and twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. Now, the purple robe, this is all a mockery if we're not clear on that, right? They're mocking Jesus. purple robe would be a sign of kingship, right? Because the governors wore purple. If you remember from your history, purple is a royal color. And it's royal because it's very expensive to make purple dye. In this area, it would have come from a mussel, actually. So they would get the mussels, extract the ink, or I guess ink, from the mussel to make the dye. And that's very expensive as opposed to something else where maybe you can make from berries or leaves or roots. Right? This would be a very expensive proposition. That's why it's royal. Now, we do have to, I want to highlight this because if you come across this, if you flip over to Mark or Matthew, it says that they put a crimson robe on him or a crimson cloak on him. And so I want to cover that because if you run across this on your own, you may be concerned, right? Because Mark says purple, Matthew says crimson. What's going on, right? And people highlight this all the time. It's a discrepancy in the Gospels. They don't match up. You know, I don't want you to run across this and be like, well, man, you know, this really hits my faith hard, because it can. And you have to understand that the Bible is a historical text written by people, inspired by the Word of God. How can you reconcile these things? And there's been a couple options. One of them is they're just colorblind. Men tend to be more colorblind than women. It's a possibility. If it's like a velvety material, could be colorblindness on top of the angle of the light. Some people say that, well, maybe they put on one crimson one and then a purple one and then took one off. And possible.
In the dye, to make the dye together.
I mean, possible. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me personally. I don't think the two cloaks make sense. I mean, the soldiers are mocking him, but they're not going to go through a whole bunch of extra effort.
I mean, it's just like you said before, is Mark's perspective as opposed to somebody else's perspective. Like maybe purple to him, maybe, you know, when all color red to somebody else.
Yeah, and you know, we're talking about a recollection of an eyewitness, and with 600 people around, did he get a good view? Doubtful, right? It's not like soldiers be like, hey, come over here and watch this, right? So the whole point I'm trying to make is there's more than this, right? This is just a small example of what you'll find when you're trying to reconcile different accounts, especially in the Gospels, right? They are people, right? And they're different accounts. And you're going to have to solve these one way or the other for yourself, right? I personally am not bothered by it. Not this one, anyway. So, you know, this is where research comes in, where you start looking at the historical text. You start doing your word studies. Turns out most scholars think that the purple here is they're describing the robe as its function rather than its color. Because typically what was scholars say, and I'm on the fence about this, it probably would have been more likely for the soldiers to have a crimson cloak, because that's what they wore, right? And they're in their area. So they probably didn't have a purple robe just hanging around. That's for special VIP delegates, right? I like it. Yeah. Yeah, they're making fun of it. Yeah, it's all in ridicule, and we're going to take it away. I like that idea. But a lot of scholars think that the purple was describing the function of the robe. Like, this robe is meant to represent a kingly robe, because they're also, throughout this section, mocking him. Yeah, we're gonna dress you up as a king. You have to work these out for yourself, right? I can't do it for you. I'm here if you have questions. But, I mean, this really bothers a lot of people. It's not a textbook, right? These are real accounts from real people. And if I asked Bobby to describe what we talked about this morning, and then I asked David what we talked about this morning, do you think they're going to match up perfectly? They're not. And they're right here, right? So think about that. This really bothers some people. This really affects some people. Yeah. Well, we ain't talked about the crown yet. Yeah. So, again, context, right? What are they doing here? They're mocking him, right? So I wanted to bring that up because that does bother some people. And then we talk about the crown of thorns. Now, this is probably maybe one of the biggest symbols of this mockery, right? The crown of thorns on top of Jesus' head. In fact, if you want to see the supposed crown of thorns, it's in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. They have it for display. It did not get burned up in the fire, which was nice. You remember there was a fire 2019, something like that. So it did not get it burned up by the fire. But apparently, the crown of thorns is a bundle of reeds that grow in the area. And then they took that bundle, formed it into a crown, and then they wrapped a thorn around it. There's a tree over there, a type of jessup tree, which grows fruit, but it has really like long thorns on it. And they took one of those young branches and wrapped it around this bundle. Why they just didn't do the whole thing, I don't know. Yeah, I think this would have been in homage of the Roman rulers, right? Because you see Caesar, he's got, I think it's olive branches wrapped around, and these are thorn branches wrapped around. The history of the crown of thorns is actually interesting. I researched it. So the crown of thorns originally was hung up in a monastery in the area after, the earliest that they could find is like the 400s. And then it went to a couple different, let's say, business leaders in the area. And then it went to King Louis IX, and he built a cathedral for this. So the crown is actually a very strong symbol. And then over time, they would cut off a thorn and give it to like dignitaries, kings and stuff. And so over time, if you look at the crown of thorns today, there's no thorns on it because they've cut them all off. So, and then there's a whole history of, well, who's got the thorns? And it's pretty interesting. So what they've done is now, if you go to Notre Dame, they've taken the crown and they've wrapped like this gold thread on it to represent it on his head, right? This was rough. The soldiers were not being gentle in any stretch of the imagination. And it says they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews." Again and again, they struck him on the head and the staff and spit on him, right? It's a mockery. Now, this is all fulfilling prophecy, too. You probably see in your footnotes some notes to the Psalms and to Isaiah. One of the Psalms says, maybe it's Isaiah 53. Let's flip over. Isaiah 53 is typically known as a suffering servant section. Let's see if we can find it. Isaiah 53. Okay, yeah, so I'll just start it at verse 4. "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. By his wounds we are healed." Right? This is all a prophecy of the coming Messiah. Now, the Jews didn't really know what to do with this section back then. This is the thing that they're missing. There's still confusion about it today because who does this represent? If the Messiah is a conquering king, right? Who's this guy? Right? How does that work? In fact, they thought it was two different people. Right? It makes sense. I feel like I'm getting a little static there. So we know as Christians that it's the same person coming twice, right? Two different time periods. And then the Psalms, Psalm, I think this says, 22? It says, by his stripes we are healed, right? Another prophecy to the coming Messiah, right? Stripes being the beating, right? The flogging that we just talked about. So another reason I think that this was probably a crimson robe is because, or one of the benefits I think of thinking that this is a crimson robe is purple robes are expensive and you don't want to get them all bloody, right? It's another thought. Because this guy he's not clean. He's sweaty, he's bloody, and we're not talking just like a scratch. We're talking like he's going to die from loss of blood, right? More than anything. So they spit on him, again, fulfilling prophecy. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him, mockery. Right? And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe, put his own clothes on him, because, hey, we don't want to waste a good robe. And they let him out to crucify him. So this is the pre-beating, if you will, or pre-mockery. Are there any questions about this section? It's pretty self-explanatory, right? Now we go into the saddest part of the gospel, the crucifixion of Jesus. We'll read verse 21 through 32. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on the way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They then offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on the right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross that we may see and believe. Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. This is the climax of the entire Bible. Right? This is the punishment for our sins. An innocent man crucified willingly took the punishment upon himself, completely innocent. And I think from a theological standpoint, right, it's not so much the physical pain, although that was a big part of it, and I hope I never find out what physical pain he went in. It's more of the shame on the divine, right? God has a name, and it's been basically thrown under the mud, right? God is, right? You think about God, he's divine. He's all-powerful. He's all-knowing, right? We say, don't say the Lord's name in vain, right? We want to respect his name, right? His honor. And he's being dishonored here. And I think that's the kind of the ultimate punishment, right? The creator of the universe being mocked by his creation is just something out of control, right? If you think about your children, my children, they're not coming into my house and mocking me. we'll set that straight really fast, right? But God, through his divine plan, the only way that we can be reconciled to him was to take the punishment. There's been, this right here, there's all kinds of theories on how this paid for our sins. You can look up things like substitutionary atonement, theories of atonement. How did this actually pay? Goes into legal theory, right? Is it just to have somebody else take your punishment? Like in a court case, you're convicted of murder. Can somebody else take your death penalty for you? Right? There's all kinds of really deep philosophical questions here. But this was the plan. And so I think for me, what I pick up is just more of the lack of honor or lack of respect for God and what he's done, and then they just mocked him. If at the very least, just the crucifixion of an innocent man, right? This was not justified in any way. But he took it willingly, and we'll see some of the details here. In verse 21, it says, a man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, were passing by on the way in from the country. These guys are probably walking in for the festival, right? It says passing by. They're probably around this area. They just happen to be at the wrong spot at a wrong time. They're walking by the palace, these places where the soldiers had mocked Jesus. And Jesus can't hold his cross. We talked about the horizontal crossbeam. He couldn't even hold it. So they forced this man, hey, carry this guy's cross. And you don't say no. Right? He didn't have a choice. Now, it's interesting that he mentions the father of Alexander and Rufus. If you look in Romans, Paul is addressing some people in Rome, and one of the people is Rufus. So it looks like Rufus grew up to be maybe a leader, or at least well-known in the church in Rome. So he was an eyewitness to this event. Kind of neat. Maybe that's why Mark included it in here. So, hey, ask Rufus about this. We don't know. And so they forced him to carry the cross. Now, this would have been the horizontal beam. If you take the average wingspan of a guy, what is this? It's about 6 feet. So I'm guessing, in my mind, the cross you would be elevated up. So maybe the cross beam was 8 feet, give or take, because you got some big guys. And then the vertical piece, probably more like a telephone pole. It just maybe a 20-foot. It's going to go in the ground some, right, to hold it steady. So maybe 15 feet above the ground. And by the time you're crucified, placed on it, nailed in, and then they lift you up, right? Because they want to get you above the crowd, because part of crucifixion is a warning to everybody else. Don't be like these guys, right? Like a public execution. So, it'd been a beam, and it'd been heavy. So, it makes sense that he couldn't, after he's been beaten, that he couldn't hold it. And they took him to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Now, it turns out, that may be a shock to many of us, we don't actually know where this was. It's outside somewhere the city walls. But they still don't know exactly where this was. We just don't know. It's kind of weird, because we got the supposed Crown of Thorns. We got a lot of other things, but we don't know this. It's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard lots of theories about why it's called that. Yeah, the hill itself was kind of rocky and shaped like a skull. The Ark of the Covenant was buried underneath Jesus, and so when the blood dripped, it touched the Ark of the Covenant, I mean, Gospels don't say, right? These are like Indiana Jones type, theories. We don't have, but it's neat to think about. We just don't know. Archaeologists have not discovered this particular section yet. And really, you think about it, it's just a hole in the ground. Right? They're not going to find, there's not much, right? They just would have dug a hole in the ground. The piece of wood is gone. Right? I mean, yeah, they have found like wood in that area, but how are you ever going to find, well, this is the piece of wood that Jesus was crucified on, right? Yeah.
A lot of people crucified over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there's lots of archaeological finds. I read something a couple years ago that they found a tomb marked as the tomb of Jesus, and they thought, well, maybe this was where he was originally buried. But it was a common name. It also seems unlikely because it wasn't Jesus' tomb that he was placed in. It was a tomb originally meant for somebody else. So, if you read your Bible, you kind of, pick up on these things. But, I think we can see lots of examples of what the tomb would have looked like, right? I mean, we can see that, like how the rock was cut away to allow for a rolling stone to roll in front of it and how it would have been rolled out. I mean, we could see examples, but do we know exactly where? No. And it makes sense because he wasn't there. So, no need to label it if he's not there. Ta-da! So, they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. So, this wine mixed with myrrh is a mild narcotic. It was the only real help that the Romans gave to people being crucified. This would have dulled the pain some, and it would have basically made you die faster, right? That was it. It's a mild narcotic. But notice he didn't take it. He took the full brunt of the suffering. I think that's why Mark is noting this here. He took the full brunt of our. He didn't take anything to dull the pain. I'm sorry, what? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hmm. I haven't heard that. Oh. Well, I need that now. Yeah. Oh. Y'all had all the good stuff. Y'all could probably still buy cocaine at the soda fountain. Okay. Man. I need that now. Yeah. I haven't seen it in a long time. Huh. Man, that'd be rough. No wonder, because you'll be away from everybody. Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, I'm glad all you guys had the fun stuff. I've got to go to the doctor and pay my copay so the health insurance industry doesn't fall behind. Okay. Huh. Huh. Nice. Well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, y'all still had the mercury thermometers too, so. You also had asbestos, so. Look at you now. You turned out fine. Yeah. Hey, we're getting off track. Asbestos served its purpose, don't get me wrong. It just turns out it causes cancer. So. Yeah, he refused. And that's the point. He took the full brunt of the pain. He didn't take anything to dull it, right? And in fact, we'll see later on, he actually extends it a little bit. He extends the suffering as much as he can. So, now this next part, they crucified him. Like all of the Bible just wraps around this one sentence, and they crucified him, like it's an afterthought. Now, he's writing to people that probably would have been familiar with what crucifixion is, right? We know, right? They knew what it was, so there's no need to describe it. It's like, and he got in his car and he drove to the store. Right? We don't have to describe all the traffic laws. But crucifixion, right? They would have long nails, like 8 inches. You can go, they've got all this. You can look this up. But briefly, long nails, it went through your wrist, right? Not through your hands, through your wrist. And then they would have, my understanding is they would have like crossed your legs and then put one through both. And so the idea, as you're hanging up there, right, it's actually, if you don't die from blood loss, it's actually a death from suffocation. Because as you lose strength, you sag, which then causes you not to be able to breathe, right? So as you sag, you can't breathe. You try to lift up, which causes pain, right? Yeah, you try to push up with your feet, which is in on its nail, and it's painful, right? It's terrible. Many ways I could think of that I'd prefer to go besides this way, right? But you can look that up. Let's see. The next section is dividing up his clothes. They cast lots to see which would get. This is a fulfillment of prophecy, right? That's the whole reason Mark puts this in there. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. It says here, it doesn't actually list it. 5:24. No. Dividing up his clothes. Yeah, Psalm 22:18. Let's flip back there. Psalm 22:18. So the Psalms are some wonderful pieces of poetry and songs, but intermixed in there, there's songs of this prophecy stuff. Like some of them are celebrations from David, worshiping the king. Some of them are laments, right? So take Psalm 22, for example. My God, why have you forsaken me? Remember that, because Jesus is going to refer to that. Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer by night, and I find no rest. Let's see. I'm skipping down to verse 7. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. Remember, this is what we talked about coming up. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. This is the Psalms written way before all this. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Let's see. Here. So I'm skipping around 16. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. It's fulfillment of prophecy, right? And then it goes on. You can read all verse 22, or Psalm 22. It's, how do you explain that if it's not supernatural, right? So they cast lots to see, and they're basically gambling to get his clothes. I don't know if he had great clothes or if this is just something to pass the time. I don't know. He would have been up there either naked or at the very most like a loincloth on, right? But no need for clothes because you're going to die. So it was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice on the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." Now, when you're crucified, at the top above your head, they would have had a placard and written out what you were charged for: stealing, trespassing, insurrection, whatever. So for Jesus, we learn in the other Gospels, Pilate had written, "The King of the Jews." That was the charge against him. right? Because remember, Pilate had no problem with him. It's not like he was an insurrectionist. He didn't claim to be king of the Romans. The charge was king of the Jews. And actually, you read the other Gospels, the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, didn't actually like it. They wanted it changed, right, because it looks bad on them. And Pilate's like, no. So it was written not only it was written in Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic. And that way everybody around could read it, right? Because there's lots of different cultures in the area. So that's what it would say. Kind of weird. I think it's just, again, a sign of that mockery, right? This is what the Jews wanted to charge him with. And everybody can see for themselves whether or not it was a good charge or not. I think this was also a way of Pilate to be like, this is on you. I didn't charge it. You charged him with this. So now it says they crucified 2 rebels with him. This is verse 27. One on the right and one on his left. Again, a fulfillment of prophecy. It says that he'll be crucified along with it says something like along with the number or something. And basically, the prophecy is he'll be crucified along with other thieves and crooks and villains, right? He'll be in that group. And so this is a fulfillment of that. Those who hurled by passed insults from him, shaking their heads and saying, well, we just read all that in the Psalms, right? Again, all of this, right, Mark is highlighting. Prophecy, 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 right? He's really hitting it hard. And any Jew that would have read this would know exactly what Mark's talking about, right? He's saying it. This guy was the Messiah. It's in the Old Testament. You just missed it, right? That's what he's hammering by again and again and again. And so no need to really rehash it. He saved others. Come down now from, they're just mocking him. Now, what's interesting, the last sentence, those crucified him with him also heaped insults on him. Now, you may remember from your Sunday school or your previous reading that one of the thieves said, leave him alone, he's basically innocent. Remember me when you see paradise today. And Jesus says, basically, I'll see you in paradise too. That's a terrible paraphrase. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. So in Luke, we see, in this same recollection from Luke, this is 23:38, I'll start at. There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." So again, this is another one of those discrepancies. Did the thief crucified with him hurl insults at Jesus? Or did he rebuke the other thief and ask to be, remember me when you come into your kingdom? Again, one of the things you have to work out for yourself. Well, yeah, there is some theological implication. But let's talk about the original case. Did he insult? Mark says heaped insults. Luke says basically the one guy repented or asked to be remembered, and Jesus accepts that. Now you got two differing accounts. Again, you have to work this out for yourself. Doesn't bother me much because I've seen people in desperate situations when they start off angry, and it's like, you've heard of like those 7 steps of acceptance, right? Some people go through all 7 steps in like 10 seconds, right? Denial, anger, deflection. Anyway, and it comes back to acceptance, right? Well, some people never get there. One thief was obviously always angry all the way to the end. To me, it seems to me like it's perfectly reasonable that the other thief, was angry at first, right? Because, hey, being crucified, not your best day. And then, you come to accept your fate, right? Once you're up on that cross, the only way you're coming down is when you're dead, right? And we all come to that conclusion, right? Now, whether you realize it or not, there's only one way you're coming out of this life. Dead, right? We all have to accept our own mortality at some point, right? Now, this guy, maybe he accepted a little bit later. But again, it's one of those things you have to work out for yourself. Again, it doesn't bother me. I personally see that as a very reasonable explanation of what happened. For some people, it really bothers them. Again, do research, ask questions, ask those who you respect in this area, ask Kenny, whatever it takes. But for some people, this really does hurt their faith. And I don't want to shy away from it, but there are reasonable explanations, I think. And that's the climax, sort of. Depends on if you consider the resurrection the climax or not. Right? But all of the Old Testament hinges around this crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Right? Without it, there's two pieces of the puzzle: the death and the resurrection. Without the death, you have no payment of sins. Without resurrection, you don't have the power of God. And I think the burial is there in the meantime as an expression of doubt and the fact that he really did die. We saw in the Psalms that Jesus was crying out, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? If you think about it, right, Jesus has been in full contact with God the Father this entire time. This is when God the Father turns his back on his Son and lets the full wrath of punishment come down. It's the payment of the sin, right? And this is the first time that they've ever, in eternity past and in eternity future, been separated. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy, right? I wish I had the words to describe how terrible this is. I'm not gifted enough to tell you what a tragedy this would be, right? The ultimate problem for God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is pain, right? That's what hell is going to be. It's going to be a wailing and gnashing of teeth, eternal pain, right? That is, people try to get around it, but the Bible describes hell as eternal punishment, right? Because you've rejected God, right? Well, it's almost a self-serving. You wanted the pain, right? This thief, take some of the insults here, right? Save yourself. Let's see. I like this last one, 32. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe. He hasn't been performing miracles this whole time. Some people say they want to see and believe, and you can do something right in front of them and they'll never believe it, right? The sermon I talked about on Sunday, don't throw pearls before swine. Some people just can't accept it, right? I don't know why. And it's my prayer that everybody comes to at least see and believe, right? But some people won't. I don't know why, right? We don't see God. Really? Really? We don't see God? Take a look around. But, the wisdom of God is foolishness to those who don't know him. I don't know. Yeah. I've got a friend of mine, dear friend, Christian, and she's going through some struggles, and she texted me, and she said, hey, Clint, how do you know that God is real? Now, this is a person who knows, right? She's been in church, she's witnessed to people, she's experienced the Holy Spirit in her heart. We all go through doubt, right? We've talked about this. Peter went through doubt. But at the same time, we know, right? And I gave her. Not only do I have, we've talked about in earlier Sunday schools, the logical reasoning that you can go through some logical arguments, right, for the mental side of you. But if you have the Holy Spirit inside of you, if you can remember when you were saved, right, you have that personal experience. It's not going to convince me or anybody else, but it's going to, my personal experience is going to convince me, right? And I know. I've seen it. I've experienced it. You can't take that away, right? Yeah. But and for some reason, I saw and I believed, and I thank God. Some people don't. I don't know why. I really don't. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He keeps going ahead of what he's after.
Mm-hmm.
Without any hesitation in essence.
Yeah. And we're small little creatures too, right? Well, and Paul talks about, yeah.
What he does, it's smaller than how much he can carry.
Yeah. It is amazing, right? Especially considering how weak I am. Well, I didn't see the ant build the space shuttle, so, let's keep things in line here. Yeah, I got it. No, the ants. Yeah, I know. I see my backyard every day, right? Yeah, no, they're very industrious creatures, and so are we, right? Paul talks about in one of the later letters, run the race of faith, right? Continue the run. Don't stop. Finish strong, right? And he's encouraging you. Move on.
Some of us is weak, some of us is strong.
Yeah. Well, I think biblically we're all weak, right? Right? It's only through the strength of God that we're able to do anything. And but we all have seasons of doubt, right? I get it. And I don't know, I didn't pry into what my friend is going through, but I can definitely understand, right? And we should be empathetic to that cause. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it would be good. And for me, I don't keep track of all the answered prayers. There's really too many. But I think it would be good for you to keep. Yeah. Right. There's thousands and you still have doubt? Come on. But for me, and I'll offer this as a device as we close, I keep for me a few core things. I have a few, 3 core arguments, logical arguments that I keep in the back of my mind, right? If I ever have doubt, I come back to those, right? From the logical, analytical side. And then I have 3, what I consider miracles that I've seen in my lifetime. And I keep those in the back of my mind for the emotional side. And whenever I have doubt, I always think back on those because I cannot explain those away. There's no explanation outside of God, right? And that's what keeps me personally centered. Now, whatever it takes for you, I get these built up in your mind now because winter is coming, as they say. A tough time is coming for you. I guarantee it. Be prepared before you get there, because the saddest thing I see is people searching for their faith in the middle of a crisis. And it doesn't usually end well. So do yourself a favor. Whatever it takes. Now, maybe you've got a notebook of all the answered prayers. Whatever it takes for you. I don't know. But just have that foundation set up for you. And read your Bible. Yeah. How about that? Simple but effective. Yeah. Research. I mean, if you have I know a lot of people like to shy away from questions. I like to plow into them because I'm contrary like that, right? But, have a question. And that's what we're here for, right? I ask after like every 20 verses, are there any questions? Right? Because I really want to make sure. And I mean that honestly. Like, you got a question? Hit me with it. I may not have the answer today, but I'll go find it. I'll go look for it, I mean, there are answers. People have doubts like, oh, well, I see this question, and it can't possibly be answered because I asked this person 20 years ago, and he didn't have an answer. Well, there's more than one person on the planet, right? I get it. Yeah. Yeah, hit me. I'm all for it, God, I serve God. Right? So, anyway. With that, before we close, any other thoughts, comments, concerns? Next week, we'll probably finish out chapter 15. And then we have 16 and a half. And we'll talk about the half when we get there. So, any other thoughts? All right, well, let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together and study your word once more. I pray that you'll let us remember the sacrifice that your son made on the cross and what it truly meant for us, for the payment of sin, and for the truly terrible thing it meant to Jesus and you. The separation, the punishment, the pain, the torment. I pray that we take these things into our hearts and that we can just admire and worship you for the sacrifice that you made on our behalf while we were yet sinners, that you still died for us. As we go into this world, I hope that we can take that internal motivation and just be brighter lights to bring people